Thank you so much, Federica. Thank you so much. We are very pleased to be here today. And the topic, I think, relates very well to the theme of the conference, Future-Proofing Health System for a Changing World. And unfortunately, many of these changes are coming like shocks, external shocks, whether they are migrants, heat waves, whether they are armed conflict and whatsoever. And we need to address them. We need to address them very quickly. And leadership, as part of the governance function, is one of the important ways to align all parts of a health system to deal with these shocks and to absorb them and hopefully actually to digest them in a way that we can even learn something from it. And we have a fantastic panel, but we have a great keynote speaker. Many of you know her. It's Professor Naomi Chambers from University of Health Management. And Naomi is thinking from the very early morning to the evening about management and leadership as well. And many of you know her because she said, I shouldn't say that, but it's true. She is Emma Bedrock, actually. You've been here for good, actually, and we hope to see you many, many more years to come. We've also on the panel Scott Greer, professor from Michigan for Health Policy, Thomas Kergel. He is from the Council of Europe Development Bank, and we have Federica Morandi, who's professor in Rome, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. It's good enough. And we were only a couple of years ago at your university with the EMMA conference. It was a great conference, so thank you so much. So I'd like to invite you, Naomi, to give us a little bit of food for thoughts, and then we will have 2 rounds with the panelists, and we come back to you for questions and answers. Please, Naomi. Yes.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So while we're just waiting for the slides to load. Oh, here we go. That looks like me. Or a younger version of me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I have been coming to the EMMA conferences on and off since 2001 when I went to Gdansk. And I think there's at least one person from Gdansk here this year. So, and in fact, we were in Barcelona, I think it was in 2005 as well. So I've chosen as my topic to kick this off, healthcare leadership for turbulent times. And I've chosen a photograph which isn't too distressing. So there are signs of light and there on the horizon, but we are talking about turbulent times. A little bit about my background so you know who's talking to you. I'm a professor of healthcare management at the University of Manchester, and I do focus on both management, leadership, and also health policy. Recently published this textbook, which in hardback version, if you were stupid enough to take to bed, could kill you. It has 42 chapters with 90 authors, and if you fell asleep reading it, and it could crack your head open. So the next one is less weighty, but no less important, from the same publishers, forthcoming in 2028. But Matthias could not believe when we had this discussion that before today, that actually this was the title of the next textbook. But I promise you, it was before I was invited to be with you today. So here is the summary of the presentation. I won't read it out in full for you. But in fact, I feel as though I'm at an optician's, actually, because I can barely read the text at the back. And there it is over there, but then I'll lose the mic. What I wanted... Can you still hear me without the mic?
Give the mic to her.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. So that's better, because I'm in danger of not being able to read the bottom line, like at the opticians. So there's the summary of the presentation, a little bit about the theory about turbulence in the healthcare setting, and then some leadership practice, which I recommend for these times, based on 2 studies that I've been involved with. But I really want to summarize by saying there is going to be no return to some golden age of relative stability in calm waters. So we need to look to leadership practices to guide us differently. So the emerging evidence that I'm going to rehearse is that these will include strength of purpose combined with competence, compassion, adaptability, creativity, hopefulness, and a relational collaborative mindset. So that's the summary for you. Some of the definitions and characteristics of turbulence are here presented. And I particularly like the non-linearity, because I think when we're in the perfect storm in healthcare management, it can feel like this. There's a simultaneity of pressures, erosion of control, everything's out of control, temporal compression, and emotional and relational strain. Now, this was, of course, completely amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it is almost, I would argue, situation normal. There is, however, range of scale and scope, and some turbulence is internally and not externally generated. We do have health systems and hospitals and community services that are in particular trouble. And in the UK, you can look no further than maternity services to see a service that probably nationally is failing. If you look at the range and scope of the public inquiries that have either reported or are still underway. And I would argue that's an internally generated turbulence rather than externally. A colleague of mine in the room, Lisa, is doing research in this area. It is also experienced differently by different generations. So for what for one generation might feel insupportable, too much, can be a cause of excitement and adventure for another generation. And if we look at Schumpeter from the economic side of perspective, he talked about this idea, this notion of creative destruction. And I think in health management and leadership and in policy, sometimes we can be rightly accused of accretion, more of the same, and then something different, rather than letting go and starting afresh. So the characteristics of turbulence in the healthcare setting, those are familiar to you. Again, I've chosen an image which, with AI, you can turn up and down the darkness. So in both of these cases, I've turned up the brightness. But I wanted to that sense of everything coming together. And this has been, that list, I've had that list, I've added to it over the years, but I've had that list since 2012. And the one that I would add, and which strikes a horrible chord in me, and you may have seen it in the pictures overnight, is what's happening in the UK, but also in other countries, which is this rise of populism, distrust in government, and this concern for othering people from different backgrounds. And you will have seen the burning bus in Belfast, and indeed people's homes that have been set alight, men in balaclavas throwing things at the police. And I know that we're not the only country that is suffering from that. What I do know is that in Greater Manchester, which has a very diverse workforce, the day after an event like that in Belfast, our healthcare workforce comes to work with huge trepidation that patients will be vilifying them if they come from a minority ethnic background. And we have, sadly, evidence to support that. So healthcare leadership in a turbulent era, there is some literature, not much in this area, but actually, in fact, increasingly, it's described as a permanently turbulent system. So we need to go with it. There isn't going to be this return to any kind of stability. So, we have to, work with that as the normal. However, the impact on patients, workforce, and leaders in healthcare of fears and uncertainties about what lies ahead causes moral stress. It causes moral stress to patients not knowing how long they have to wait. In some countries, whether they can afford the healthcare that is going to be recommended for them, and so on. And the importance, therefore, for managers and for leaders here is about providing as safe a space as possible for both workforce and also for patients. Has anybody been watching The Pit? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so medical drama available, I think I did check in Europe as well. I'm glued. In fact, I'm really frustrated because they keep releasing the next hour and I haven't got to the end yet. But anyway, recommend it. So the pit is on the surface about in real time. It's a drama, it's fictional, an ER department in Pittsburgh, which is why it's called the Pit. But actually, it's also about the American healthcare ecosystem. And even after Obama and the Affordable Health Care Act, how fragile that system is for people who are on low incomes in terms of affordability. So, and the importance there of providing a safe space and the moral stress that the staff there are undergoing. So just a note on preparedness versus resilience, and then we're going to go on to our 2 case studies. So I need to tell you that I have some feelings of ambivalence around the word resilience. Okay? So it is benign in some respects. We have colleagues at Manchester University, led by Duncan Shaw, that is looking at recovery, renewal and resilience for communities that might be at risk of severe disruption. And they've done some very interesting piece of research, which I share with you, just one headline around the economic benefit of, as somebody has said this morning around investing in workforce, investing in resilience. So for £1 spent, they have argued, they have found evidence that there's £35 worth of public value. However, there is a darker side to resilience, which is an adverse event that is then more likely to be experienced by minoritized or vulnerable groups who then become resilient. What you need to be is resilient. So that's where we're talking about toughness that can then develop into hardness. And there's a midwife at Nottingham, which is in the middle of a public inquiry into failures of care, babies dying, babies being harmed, women dying during childbirth in the UK in the 21st century. And she actually said, to be resilient, you have to lower your compassion. So it's just a word of caution about that term, I think is important. The normalization of dysfunctional environments, we have as leaders to make sure that does not happen. So 2 areas two studies I want to focus on, again, give some hope in all of this. One of which is that a colleague of mine, Mark Exworthy from Birmingham, myself, carried out a very exploratory study looking at long-serving chief executives in the NHS. And this is where we wanted to find out what kept them going and what made them tick. And this is what we found, and we've summarized it in terms of organizational ambidexterity. Their average tenure, either within one organization or across a few, was 17 years. I have to tell you that at the moment, or 2025 at least, the average length of tenure for an NHS CEO of a mental health service or a hospital or a community service is 2 years and 7 months. We all know that is not going to lead to long-term planning, execution, and so on. So these are the exceptions. And this is what we found. And I won't read the list there out to you, but you get a sense of being very organizationally ambidextrous, as well as also having quite a positive, hopeful mindset, and very much working the politics, very much operating at the national level as well as at the local level. In the interest of time, because I'm supposed to finish within 5 minutes, is that right, Matthias? Yep. Something like that. Keep going. Yeah, I intend to keep going. You're absolutely right. Yeah. That's my motto, actually. Keep going. Yeah. Ask forgiveness, not permission. Yeah, absolutely. I'm now going to transport you out of the cozy first worldness of the UK to the country of Myanmar, and I would be amazed if there's anybody here from Myanmar. It's very difficult to get out of Myanmar. It's incredibly difficult to get into Myanmar. My university really hated the fact that I went there in February. They said that they couldn't insure me because of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice about travel to all areas of the country except for Rangoon, Yangon, but we did get there in the end. Probably delivered the first ever management and leadership training session ever in Myanmar. could have been Burma. I'm sorry, the other word for Myanmar is Burma, and some people are more used to the term Burma, and politically it is more acceptable in some regards. Some of you won't know anything about Myanmar. It's a very fragile country. It had not a long experiment in democracy with Aung San Suu Kyi, who was there for a few years. Somebody's nodding who seems to have a background and know about Myanmar. We need to catch up later over a drink. Come and find me if I don't find you.
3 minutes, Naomi.
Yep, thank you. That gives you an idea. When we ask them what are the qualities of an effective leader, this is a country that is barely operating, you can imagine. So, and that's what we saw. And look how soft those qualities are. They are talk about safe space. That it was really important to them. So I'll just flip through this, which is findings from interviews and a literature review about managing and leading in austere environments. I present this to you because I think there's learning for us in the first world countries for how people can operate. And you can see there we're talking about relational leadership with courage and kindness, summarizing that. So I'm going to leave you with, I think sometimes academic prose doesn't quite reach where we need it to get to in terms of an offering. And so I'm going to share with you an extract of a poem by John O'Donoghue for all of you who are leaders. May you have the grace and wisdom to act kindly, learning to distinguish between what is personal and what is not. May you learn to cultivate the art of presence in order to engage with those who meet you. And when someone fails or disappoints you, may the graciousness with which you engage be their stairway to renewal and refinement. I will jump to the last verse now. This is already an extract. May you know the wisdom of deep listening, the healing of wholesome words, so there's learning here, the encouragement of the appreciative gaze, the decorum of held dignity, the springtime edge of the bleak question. May you have good friends to mirror your blind spots. May leadership be for you a true adventure for growth.
Thank you, Naomi. And before you sit down, just one question. I mean, you're talking about leadership in turbulent times, and as you say, we constantly have turbulent times. But wasn't COVID-19 a big test case, actually, of leadership? Haven't we learned a lot of this? Are there lessons to be taken?
I think you're absolutely right, there are. And there's a literature around lessons to be taken. And there's also policy learning from those countries who managed better than other countries. So it's too much for me to rehearse now, but absolutely, yes.
Very good. Thank you so much. A big applause again. And now in this first quick round of panel discussion, we will ask our distinguished panelists, about the key strategies for strengthening leadership for resilience and health securities. And we thought we'd start with you, Scott, actually, and we start with the health system perspective, and then we move on more to a health workforce organizational perspective, and then to strategic investment for leadership. Please, Scott.
So,
it's on?
No.
Yes.
It's somewhat resilient. So talking about resilience is about coming back from something at least as well, if not better. So staggering on, burned out with moral injury and doing a bad job is not a sign of resilience, but because policymakers have been using resilience to cover so much of what they wanted to do anyway, we've devalued the word. Thinking about resilience in healthcare systems and leadership is really important because it does cover something distinctive. If you have a known risk, if you have a heat risk or a fire risk or a mass casualty risk, you prepare for that, right? You buy a generator if there's going to be a power outage, and you have a command center if there's going to be a mass casualty event at your hospital. Resilience is something different. It's for the risks that you can't prepare. It's for the mixtures of risks that you can't anticipate. It's for when you have population displacement during a pandemic. It's when you have a mass casualty event during a heat wave. It's when you have fires in a place like England that's not accustomed to dealing with wildfires at all. So you prepare for risks. You build resilience for precisely the places in which you can't identify and prepare for the risk. That's why I think we still need the word resilience, despite the efforts of many people to devalue it. Building resilience, though, doesn't work the same way as saying, we might have a power outage, therefore we buy a generator. Because building resilience is thinking about how people within the organization act. And for the last 2 minutes, all I'm going to do is give you a fancy, boring academic version of the poem, okay? Because resilience often requires empowering people, building networks within the organization, identifying when something you're doing is pushing your best staff into burnout or moral injury, because it's your best staff who try and solve the problem through working harder until they become incapable of working effectively at all. So really trying to build resilience is often about making your organization a little bit sloppier, with a little bit more empowerment, a little bit more experimentation, more learning by doing, and less of what? Static efficiency, centralized control, replacing middle managers with artificial intelligence, don't do that. Algorithms, scripts. Instead, it's about ex post validation that what this person is doing works, because that allows them to do experimentation and it reduces the moral damage that we saw, for example, in COVID-19. Economists talk about static and dynamic efficiency. I told you this was going to be the opposite of a poem. Static efficiency is accountant's efficiency, right? The most efficient way to do things with just-in-time or with very tight audit controls or with not letting frontline staff allocate resources. That's static efficiency. It works out on Excel right now. Dynamic efficiency is when you make investments and you take risks and you build a more structurally, systemically efficient organization. Resilience is dynamically efficient. Resilience is beneficial when you've invested in the staff and the slack, the creativity and the empowerment that might not be the most efficient way to do your job today, but is the most efficient way to see your organization survive and even thrive, all the things you can't predict.
But Scott, that means that we need to calculate efficiency differently if we want to be resilient, because what you say is that the sloppier organization, you know, has some more capacity probably, so it will be a little bit more expensive, isn't it?
Yes. Well, look at hospital beds, okay? Everybody was trying to reduce the number of hospital beds, right? When the OECD started doing bar charts of beds per 100,000 people, it was implicitly to shame the people who had too many beds, right? Naughty Germany, too many beds. Well, come COVID-19, having a lot of beds turned out to be quite helpful, not because they were necessarily allocated for the correct purposes or this or that, but because having the slack in the system, which wasn't doing that much harm beforehand, turned out to be really beneficial. And otherwise, what you end up doing is putting people in entirely wrong care settings, or, as happened in a lot of places, pushing people with COVID into nursing homes, which was just a public health disaster and a moral disaster. So let's go back and look at all the pressure that was put on Germans to shut down hospital beds and ask if that was so wise, given the subsequent performance in the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Scott. I think we will come back also later on to better understand, you know, how to implement this vision of you know, what do leaders actually need to do to go further down the road to have this networked organization with the sloppiness and the capacities and all this fun, great stuff. But we move a little bit more to the concrete organizational level now with you, Federica, you know, and you're going to talk about the health workforce. And I think when we talk about leadership and resilience, the health workforce always plays a very eminent role, actually, you know. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, it's I wrote something, and because I huge thinking about how to enter in this very inspiring speech, and I think that health security is not just through technology processes, but from my perspective, it happens through people. And it's not a question of numbers of people, but it's a question of combination of capacities, of skills, of creativity that people can have. It's a sort of when you adopt the periodic table of chemistry. Now you mix together things and you find out new solutions. And if we think about the pandemic period, but all the emergential situations, healthcare workforce act in this way during the emergencies when people and systems are not secure. Healthcare workforce don't stay in their role. They adopt new procedures, they invent, they interact, and they are named heroes. I do remember during the pandemic, healthcare workforce, they are named heroes. And technically, from the organizational study perspective, when people act beyond the role, beyond the rules and the procedures, we say that they act in a positive organizational disobedience. So it means when it is necessary to compensate something that is not going well within the organization. So people try to react in this crisis. But the question is, can we allow that the security of the system and of the organizations are based just on heroism, on reactions, on disobedience? Maybe not, because I was impressed, Naomi, from one of your slides in which I saw the quotation of a midwife, and she said to increase resilience, it is necessary to decrease the compassion. This is an important point, so we can't just base on quick reactions, but we know to compensate the system inefficiencies. And so I think that the two challenges for leadership are, first of all, to transform the resilience in anti-fragility. So it means that organizations need not just to react, but to learn and to understand from previous mistakes and from the crisis, and to increase the organizational capabilities in general. And then a second important point, and I was impressed from your word clouds, the second main point for leadership is to recognize the value of people. And recognize the value of people means to invest in people and to sustain people and to empower people. So as we said, in the pop-up in the word cloud. So just to me, the leadership for resilience is prepare the human capital for future challenges by learning.
I really like the positive disobedience, I think this is a great metaphor. And from what you say, actually, you would rather talk about a very distributed form of leadership, isn't it? Because you feel it goes over the entire workforce almost, that everybody needs to take some responsibility for it and understands this.
Yes, I don't want to spoil the second part of my,
Cool.
but this is exactly, we need to equip the whole organization with the right amount of competencies to be leader.
It's not a spoiler, it's just a preview, sneak preview.
Yes, it's
Nobody
a preview.
goes to the toilet now. We will be more interesting. Please, Thomas, now you've heard Scott's vision and you heard something about the health workforce. Yes. And of course, you as a financer of development in Europe and other places, you probably think all the time about resilience and health security, how to make these health systems stronger. What is your advice? What is your view on this?
We think all the time of how to get the money back. So I'm here for the Council of Europe Development Bank, but so this is why I'm wearing a suit. But I'm not a banker, so this is why I don't have a tie. And I see that there are not that many people with a tie.
I'm wearing a suit as well.
Well, that's the point. So I got a little bit confused after hearing the both of you, because I was scratching the title of my intervention by writing Leadership for Preparedness after having written Leadership for Resilience, and then I wrote it back, Leadership for Resilience. The Council of Europe Development Bank is a social bank. It's the social bank of Europe. It's based in Paris. It's linked to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. And why I'm saying that is because when we when we actually build, if we build on what we just heard, maybe the question is really how you translate that into concrete investment strategies. And this is quite a challenge that you ask me here. So I was thinking it through, and I think maybe we have three priorities that we look at. I think an important thing is to build resilience before the crisis. So that's the preparedness that you were talking about. In practice, it means really to design projects, systems, or infrastructure that remain functional under the stress. And I can give you plenty of examples of that illustrates this or that do not illustrate this. But in the projects that we finance, we support projects all across Europe, and we will be really checking, we will be challenging the proposals that get on our boards at the appraisal stage when we assess the feasibility and the bankability of the project. And so we'll be really checking whether indeed we have flexibility of space, for instance. I visited a project in Corsica where they put additional bedhead units in the parking lot under roof, so that they could increase the number of beds, as you were saying, that they have in Germany. I'm not sure that was the same climate over there. But the second point is really about energy autonomy. And we see for the past 2 months, we've seen how energy autonomy is very important, both at national level, but also at facility level. And the third point maybe that we're looking at is when we think about resilience of the projects that are presented to us is indeed the continuity of care, the continuity of critical services that will be ensured during a crisis. And for this, I have a very nice example. We've been financing a hospital in South Turkey on the border with Syria in Kilis. And you may remember that Kilis and Gaziantep faced an earthquake 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember, 3 years ago. And thank God this hospital was the only building that actually remained standing. And indeed, you can imagine, had it been falling apart, the situation of the people around. So those are really not options that we're looking at. It's really a way to determine whether facilities remain operational during the crisis. The second point I want to make, I still have 5 minutes, right?
3, 2.
1. The second point I want to make is really to focus on access. Access in particular during a crisis. We can all agree that resilience is whether people can still reach the medical services, the care services. And we see this very well on the eastern side of the continent in Ukraine. In Ukraine, beyond the infrastructure, it's really a key issue that displaced people can actually access healthcare services in those regions that they are now installed and displaced. It's those people that are on the front line, it's those people, the vulnerable people who actually could not flee because they just couldn't get to the lift downstairs and they didn't have anybody to carry them in the stairs. So in some projects we support, such as resilience centers in Ukraine, again, community service centers, what we're really looking at is whether they remain accessible during a crisis. And the third point I want to make during that last minute is really...
It's the longest minute of all.
Of course. Is really how to integrate vulnerability. Namely, you were talking about vulnerable people, vulnerable groups. You mentioned the PIT series, and we really make sure that this is actually taken care of within the projects that are submitted to us. And I'm proud to say that we have developed a tool, a screening tool, the vulnerability lens, where we ask who is most exposed in the project that you submit, Where are the barriers and how are they dealt with? How do they evolve in a crisis? So in some projects in social care, it leads to adaptation, such as bringing services closer to the population. For instance, decentralization. In Moldova, we work in enhancing the hospital care system in the north of the country. In this country, in Spain, we've been working with the autonomous community of Castilla y León to develop the network in Soria. For those who know, it's a city that is quite actually far from other healthcare centers. Strengthening links of hospital and community care. I think it's very important as well. People come to us with a hospital project and they don't explain how this will be integrated in the overall medical environment and in the catchment area. And adapting those facilities for the reduced mobility of people. We have a lot of projects where it's about climate change, but it's also about accessibility of those who are in a vulnerable situation. So just to make one more sentence, I think vulnerability is actually a good indicator of how successful or not successful your system is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Naomi, I have to ask you, aren't there worlds apart? We are talking, well, Scott started talking about organizational issue, management issues. Then we had from Federica, the health workforce, making them resilient, distributed governments. We had Thomas who was talking about access, energy autonomy. But there's a parallel discussion, you know, with regards to armed conflict, where we talk about bomb-safe car parks underneath hospitals, you know, and it's a serious discussion. It's a serious discussion with a lot of money behind it. What is your impression? I mean,
does it come on?
not no.
Oh, yeah. So I actually think there's a line that can be drawn across all of these, and what you're talking about in terms of armed conflict, if you like, is part of a continuum rather than something separate. Okay, so Scott talked about dynamic efficiency as opposed to static efficiency, and he relates that to the normative interpretation of the term, which I don't have any problem with, resilience, which is tough but flexible. I would translate that to trust your frontline professionals, which is, I think, what Federica's been talking about as well. Trust them. Don't infantilize them. Trust them. They actually have the answers. And in COVID, that's what happened. The frontline professionals pivoted health services throughout wherever they were affected to provide care for COVID patients, and on the whole did it incredibly well. In terms of vulnerability, there's two terms of there's vulnerability as in vulnerable groups, and there's vulnerable as in anti-fragility, which I really like that term. So I hadn't actually thought about this, but I need to go back home and say, to what extent has the UK learnt from COVID and is aiming for 85% capacity in its hospitals and not 100%, because that's what happened last time, and I don't think there's been any change. In terms of war conflict situations, I do recommend a book. It's not great literature, but it's a page-turner called War Doctor. I don't know if anybody's read it, but can't remember, it's David.
Naomi, that's not the point of the book, you know, because the discussions are going on and we are spending millions and millions and millions, you know, on a militarized vision, which is not reflecting what is
So what I'm trying to say to you is this is experiences of people who work as doctors in military conflict zones, and what works there and what can be achieved when there is no infrastructure.
Okay, but the challenge is different. Figure that another country is involved in an armed conflict, and what will be done with the cancer patients, for example? They need to be treated somewhere else. They need to be treated then in the UK, in Germany, in France, in Spain, and so on. So we need to be prepared for these things, actually. This is access, actually, what you're going to say. And we don't have much of this discussion, actually, you know, that we are taking this serious while there's a lot of spending on the bomb-safe car parks.
So I think what you're saying there, and this bank is an exception, is that there's not a lot of transnational effort in terms of looking after each other. That may be within countries, but not across countries in the way, even with the EU, that it could be.
Very good. Thank you so much, Naomi. Can we go to our second round, actually, to think about, how we can speed up the transition to a better leadership, to stronger leadership, for resilience and health security. And maybe we start with you, Federica, this time.
Yes. Okay, let me start from citing, now I wear my hat as academics, so I just want to cite one of the possibility that we have is to look at the leadership in a specific way by adopting the theory of Room and Yetton. This theory is one of my favorite theory about leadership. They say that the role of the leader is to remove obstacles and barriers that prevent people to reach their own goals. And I think that these barriers are everywhere within an organizations, and these barriers can be seen just from a top-down perspective, but they need to be seen also in a peer-to-peer perspective and also from the bottom of the organization. And it is necessary so to equip people, all the people within organization, and here we have the term of diffused leadership. So we need to equip people with the capabilities, with the competencies to identify barriers and to understand where the barriers are, and also to create the conditions to remove them. So I think that the diffused leadership is how to put in practice this theoretical perspective, and also how to support the healthcare organizations. Because we need to allow people to manage the decision-making process where the decisions are taken and where the process are done. We have a couple of solutions. So from an institutional level, from the policy-making level, the suggestion can be to create and to develop a common leadership competency framework. And in this way, all the healthcare professionals can have a similar pattern of competencies and can spread their ability to be a leader within the organization. At an organizational level, instead, if we look within the organization, we need to create the conditions that can enable professionals to exercise leadership. So it means to, for instance, redesign the governance processes, to empower the role of people within the teams, and to increase their self-efficacy, so we can say to them, you are good, you can do that, so you are not just equipped with the competencies, but also with the trust from your organization. And another suggestion is what we are trying to do within in a research project is to try to think about new roles within healthcare organizations that can act in a diffused leadership position. Because we are usually within our organizations, we have traditional roles for healthcare professionals, but the innovation patterns are going in another direction, and so we need to rethink organizational roles and to try to understand how they can act as a leader. So I think that resilience can be achieved when everyone within an organization is a leader of a process, of a team, of it's part of the job.
Federica. Scott, you heard Federica, and she was very clear saying leaders' role is to remove barriers for their colleagues, their staff, their team, whatsoever. You've been studying quite intensively governance and leadership in COVID-19, actually. Did you see some good leadership examples there?
So we're talking about leadership and governance together, and that's one of the things I love about Emma is it's inextricable that policy and people cannot be separated. So absolutely, I agree about the role of leaders. And part of what leaders need to do is create the permission structure, right? You could be listening to this entire panel and thinking, how do I manage 5 people better? Good for you. You should also be thinking, what would I tell the minister about how to have a system that will survive the next crisis? Because if the big problem of the private sector is narrow short-termist thinking, the big problem of the public sector is fear of failure, right? Being mediocre is much better than trying to do something and failing. Being mediocre doesn't get you in the newspapers. Trying to do something and failing does, and your minister is going to know about it. So the governance problem is to build a permission structure. My personal anecdotal gauge of the health of an organization is how long can I talk to an intelligent, engaged, well-intentioned member before we have some absolutely impenetrable bureaucratic topic. We get together, we spend half an hour on how we're going to save civilization, and then we're suddenly talking about some stupid contracting rule or travel budgets or accountability for the coffee we just drank. Right? That's an unhealthy organization because it's obsessed with process accountability. In a healthy organization, you talk about what you're here to do. Right? So the permission structure is in that very tangible thing. Are you genuinely worried about accounting for drinking a cup of coffee? If so, this organization needs leadership that's going to get out of the way and allow you to do the job you're hired to do.
Scott,
yeah?
These are great suggestions. I just wonder, and you're making a great plan, but how do the other people know about this? I mean, the second round here is a bit about, how do we get to these visions? What can be done? What sort of, how do you implement this if you were the leader? How would you like to see a leader to implement this permission structure?
I mean, a lot of it is simply signaling, right? The basic thing is you want to produce mechanisms that reward people for doing good jobs. Part of this is personnel as people. If I find somebody who is attempting to do a good version of their job, I give them a little bit more protection, and other people notice that this person's career seems to be picking up. And you can do that at any level, from a small organization to the minister. You don't want to say, here's the organization that's going to work. Here's me, I've designed the governance, I've aligned the incentives, and it'll work forever. No, that's never going to happen. What you want to do is trigger and reinforce the processes that give you a healthier organization. And we have the buzzwords, right? So diversity of professional backgrounds, ages, ethnicities, whatever, because that gets better ideas into it. Looser coupling, so that you don't have a single point of failure. But all of these, they're desirable things. How do you get there? You get there by identifying and rewarding the behaviors and the people who are doing the right thing, which is learning, incorporating it, building their own capacity and leadership. And if you don't want a resilient organization or a learning organization, then you have an enormous amount of ex-ante accountability about finances, and the performance metrics are less important than the compliance.
Great, Scott. I could listen all afternoon to you, but we now go to Thomas. From the bank's perspective, what can you do to speed up the process in countries, strengthening leadership for resilience and security?
It's a real challenge, Matthias. It's a real challenge because I think what is important when projects are submitted is really how do you turn strategy into a bankable, feasible pipeline of projects. And I think here leadership really means that you present concrete projects with clear priorities and a strong implementation capacity. And that capacity is often what is missing, because people don't have the expertise, or they leave for a better salary in the private sector. I'm talking about public finance projects. Therefore, it works really if the borrower is very clear about what it wants to do, and if he's not, he's clear about, he's ready to accept the expertise that is needed. Somehow this is very difficult in some countries or with some ministries. I could quote you plenty of examples of such situations, but I won't, because I still need to be diplomatic. But I can give you examples of situations where that leadership was really key in making things changing. Again, I was in Ukraine 2 weeks ago. I was in an oblast, Rivne, which is between Lviv and Kiev, and we visited a regional hospital that was actually built in 18 months by the regional military governor of the oblast, with a state-of-the-art type of infrastructure. And we were looking at each other and saying, why can't we do this in other places if they can do it here? Well, basically the guy who is 35, I am almost double his age, is just a leader. He just managed to get people around. And actually, I'm talking about this country because we probably tend to forget about it. But if the success or the non-failure of this country today is probably due to their leadership at different levels. But back to healthcare systems, I think really if there is no leadership in those projects, then you have projects that are lagging behind for 8, 10, 15 years. This hospital in Kilis was built in 15 months. Why also? Because preparation is key. Politicians are very often in a hurry to cut the ribbon. They want to see bricks, and they don't understand that you need to prepare your project properly beforehand and not be facing with pitfalls after end. I can stop here if you wish.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Actually, I buy everything what you say here on the panel, and you seem also to converge on saying we need a new form of efficiency, resilience requires this, and we need more capacity. But here I see a bit of a dilemma, actually, because some countries, you know, which already have, for example, a very high doctor and nurse density, have difficulties to recruit. You know, it's demography. It's not only that the patients and the workers get older, but also the cohorts from which we can recruit are shrinking. So what are we doing in this situation? Please, Naomi, you go first.
I actually wanted to touch on, Matthias, I just wanted to touch on something else, because the original question was what can we do to improve the situation? And I think the first thing we need to do is to acknowledge, as Thomas just has, we need to acknowledge quite significant variation in the quality of management and leadership, which is what you obviously do with your due diligence, which some countries are better at doing than others. We actually have in the UK an amazing tool to do that, because we've got the National Staff Survey that's been going for 20 years, and that absolutely surfaces bad leadership in terms of level of staff engagement. What proportion of staff would recommend this place for others to work in as a place to work? Would you recommend this place for your family to be treated? And the results vary from 20 to 80%. There's a lot of material there to be working with. And to end on a positive note, Mary Dixon Woods, a research academic that health service research academic you might be familiar with, talks about positive deviance. So she argues for looking out for positive deviance isn't quite as controversial as it might sound. It just means examples of best practice and learning from them, not just learning from failure. Where do they do it really well?
That's great. Positive deviance, positive disobedience, great works I can take from this panel. Before we go to a wrap up, it's the opportunity for all of you to pose questions to our speakers here. And I'm waiting for a show of hands. Who's going to be the icebreaker? There. Oh, can you go, Maral, please? Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this super interesting panel. I'm a neuroscientist and I work for an AI research SME. It seems that, of course, like the next crisis is coming, probably like sooner than most of us think. It also seems that we are knowledgeable about the solutions, right? We have identified most of them. We have heard plenty of sort of like virtuous examples, but pretty isolated ones. At the same time, though, Europe is one, but it is very diverse, but it has to act as like one entity now more than ever. So in practice, really, what is the starting point, like to be ready in all countries, across all countries for the next crisis? Like we probably have like, I don't know, a timeline of like 3 years, 4 years. Like, so really, how do we put everyone on the same page? Or how do we at least attempt to do that to begin with?
Thank you so much for this cool question. Can we collect another 1 or 2 questions before we put them to the panel? Who wants to go next? Yes, I see this. Terence over there.
Thank you, Terence Hines, Department of Health, Ireland. I'm just interested in knowing how you recognise the difference between, let's say, productive slack and ineffective inefficiency. And that can be, excuse me, whether at the team level or the organization level. Like, the easy answer might be, well, one of those will be performing well with their productive stack. But if we encounter those people at the start of that journey, and one might be seeming to be not fully utilizing all the resources because of the journey they're on to be effective in 5 or 10 years, but the other one may just be, you know, inefficient as well.
Is resilience low value care?
Yeah. So how do we recognize the difference, I suppose? Thank you.
One more question, please. Yes. Oh, over there. Yes, superb. Just the other side of the... I'll be quicker.
Maybe, yes.
Well, you got your workout in. All right, my name is Greg Orewa. I'm from the U.S. University of Texas, San Antonio. And, you know, great panel session. And you guys talked a lot about leadership qualities and leaders. But I have a question, right? You know, and somebody talked about how does all the other countries adapt to change in workforce. But this question is really workforce related, right? So in Africa, we're experiencing brain drain, right? Brain drain is migration of skilled workers. You know, what do you have to say about that? Because most of our skilled workers, doctors, nurses, are moving overseas, and they're facing a real big problem right now in some countries. And the leaders are having a hard time to even have a control of that. So what advice would you have, and how does that whole dynamic work in this whole picture of what you said about leadership?
Thank you so much. Good question. You know, you can try to build resilience, but then I was on Monday in Saxony-Anhalt in Germany, and they most likely will have an AfD government in September, and they already pledged to let all foreign doctors and nurses go. So much about resilience. So, yes, 3 questions. We had the one on the right starting point, from where do we start, when do we start actually, productive slack, you know, how do we justify this, and how do we make sure that the extra capacity is not just low value care, you know, we spend money again for no effect and we believe we are resilient. And the third one is the adaptation, you know, with regards to migrant worker, health workforce, you know, and how they are received in countries, how policymakers are seeing them, you know, and what does it all entail? Who wants to start? You don't need to respond to all the 3 questions. You can pick out the one you feel best suited to. Naomi, you go first. Great. But I have my microphone.
I want to start with the last one, actually, because I think your question was, you know, what responsibility do we have in Europe about the brain drain from Africa? And I think, thank you for raising it. It's really important, because we talk a lot about being values-driven, but actually, in order to fill our vacant nursing and medical posts in hospitals, in order to provide the social care for people in residential and nursing homes, we're very keen to recruit from those countries that can least afford to lose those staff. There are, I think, some initiatives in some countries, I think I may have heard from Ireland this morning, where they're trying to do workforce planning to try and decrease the dependence from countries like that. But I think we need to have much more of a debate about a statement, just as we have statements around climate change. We need to have a statement around that. What are we going to give back to those countries when we are taking their doctors? What are we giving back to them?
The UK has a very particular recruitment pattern, because you are replacing all the EU migrant worker with people from Pakistan, India, and other places. And we have such a statement, which is the WHO Global Code on the International Recruitment of Health Personnel. And some try to adhere to it, but not everybody. You are absolutely right. I think very important question. Even if some of the European countries are not the bad guys here, you know, there's enough problematic recruitment behavior in countries. Anybody else to whatever of the 3? We need just to make sure that they are all 3 answered.
Yes, I want to compliment to the answer of Naomi about the brain drain, or more in general about the attraction and retention of workforce, because we are experiencing exactly the same problem across Europe and also in other countries. I think one point important is who wants to study for a profession that can be the same for the whole life. We know that many healthcare professionals have exactly the same things from the very beginning to the very end of their career. So it's not motivating. And we have also the problem of compensation for sure, but it's not the same the only problem, the compensation. So people don't want to be a doctor or to be a nurse or want to study abroad or to study other things, not just because the money, but because the meaning of the work that they do, and also the interest for the work. So from my perspective, from human resource scholar, I think that we need to study a little bit more how to redesign jobs in healthcare.
Thank you so much, Federica. Please, Thomas.
You want to know about investment?
Yeah, investment.
So I think we also need to invest more in medical schools, nursing schools, and to attract more students. So this is what we do at CEB. We are financing a medical faculty in Banja Luka in Bosnia, for instance. But closer to here, we're actually financing the refurbishment of the San Pau complex to build the nursing school in the middle of the courtyard that some of you know. This is actually our contribution as an investment bank to the problem of healthcare workforce. I also think that you probably need, it was not said yet, I think, but you probably need also to be more flexible about who can do what. In France, they finally opened the possibility to get vaccinated in pharmacies when it was forbidden for years and years and years. In other countries, they finally opened the possibility for upskilled nurses to do what doctors were trying to keep as their exclusive capacity of doing. So I haven't heard this here. It's not the field of the bank, but it's really something that probably we need to look at as well.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And with regards to the investment in the health workforce, 3 years ago, there was the 5th Global Conference on Human Resources for Health by WHO, and they published a policy brief which showed that the evidence is clear: invest in the education, and once you've done this, protect the educated people, because if you then have working conditions which make you leave the sector instantly, it's sunk cost. You lose all the money that you have invested. So these two, it's investment in education and, of course, the protection of this. Scott, also workforce or what? I mean, I can see workforce always moving center stage. We have 3 topics.
That's entirely appropriate. So I love it partly because workforce is incredibly important, and because I get the whole of Europe and the definition of slack. So lots to talk about. On productive slack, I mean, we evaluate people every day, right? We kind of, you're hired, but it's not like you remain an embryo until something goes wrong. So take beds. We know that bed occupancy is a perfectly good indicator. So above 80, even outside a crisis, things start to go wrong, right? You get more hospital-acquired infections. You get more people taking sick leave because the hospital's too stressful. Does your IT department have staff capacity to do side projects, right? Little ways to make things better, or are they spending all their time trying to keep these antiquated systems running? And you can tell that pretty quickly, right? And you can get some high-level indicators. Professors, if you reduce their administrative burden, do they write more papers? If they do, then probably that's, then they're not actually, then that is potentially productive activity that you've unleashed. And you can kind of go through sector by sector and identify reasonably good indicators that this thing is being run too hot, or that this person is kind of a waste of space. Europe. Europe is extremely diverse. It is extremely loosely coupled, right? The odds that a decision made in Berlin actually lead to an intended effect in Ciudad Real are very low. It is increasingly well coordinated in many different ways, ranging from the European Council having a sort of culture of its own, down to activities like us today or the Erasmus students you can go see. So there's many ways in which you'd say Europe starts from a baseline of high resilience. And many of the things people criticize most about the European Union are precisely results of that slack, of that loose coupling, right? It's incredibly difficult for a president of the European Commission to get out there and declare an agenda and then actually do that agenda. And heaven knows they try. Why is it hard? Because Europe is diverse, gigantic, loosely coupled. There's hundreds of millions of people doing their own thing. So I'm not super worried about the resilience of the European Union. I would predict that you're going to have a thriving industry of people being outraged about how it doesn't have enough leadership and its reaction times are slow. And I think you might say that actually that's a productive form of slack in European politics. I would also add that when the European Union does face a crisis, the reaction times are not that slow. June 2020, one council meeting basically reshaped health policy in Europe. It took less than a month to outline practically everything the EU has subsequently done in Ukraine. Like, when things are urgent enough, it turns out that those coordinating mechanisms are actually fairly dense. And if everybody wants to use them, they use them.
Thank you,
And
Scott.
it's because people know each other and they've been working with each other for so many, many years that when there is a crisis, they actually can reach out to each other and make quick decisions.
Is it a good way to respond to your question, or it's good enough? I can see that. Nice, thank you for trying, guys. Federica.
Yeah.
Oh, you already said something, did you?
No.
No, exactly.
No. I commented about the first question, brain drain, and yes, attraction and retention, and the preparedness for next crisis. I think that we need to work on the capabilities and on infrastructure by considering also the human resources infrastructure, not just the other infrastructures that are really important, and without investments, without resources, we can't do anything. But these investments and these resources should be paid to increase and to improve the capabilities of our systems in terms of workforce, because they are the heart of everything.
We still have time for one more question before we do the wrap up. Yeah, I can see this. There's a competition, please. Come down.
No, it's good for you. No, my question is quite fast, and it is mostly regarding what Scott was mentioning regarding that we need to have more innovative organizations so that it can be more resilient. But actually, his point I wanted to make it to Naomi, just to ask her. You presented the length of the CEOs at the hospitals in NHS was something like 2.7. As a former CEO that's with 10,000 workers, I want to ask you, how many of the long-standing CEOs at NHS, they work innovative or they are conservative?
So that's a great question. So actually, I think our study mapped what's in the evidence about long-serving CEOs outside the healthcare setting. And there's like a bell-shaped curvilinear thing where basically if you stay too long, and there's like 18 to 20 years, then actually what can set in, the evidence shows, is a rigidity. What we found, wasn't enough time to talk about this, was to what extent, this was self-report, they clearly they were burnishing their story, and we were aware of that. But I would say the evidence was there about innovation and improvement, and they merged and they refreshed very, very importantly, their top management team was in each case was a very strong team. So they weren't operating on their own. It was collective leadership very, very strongly. So yeah, they were on the whole innovative. But I know, because we've got case studies of those who stay much longer, rigidity sets in.
But I wanted to ask you, doesn't have it repercussions, if you're so short on the job that you say, I better don't start something big, my successor can do this, I just have a cool time?
Yeah, no, they don't have a cool time at all. Like, there aren't any NHS CEOs, I don't think, in the room. But, the cool time is not it. The reason they only stay for 2 years and 7 months normally is that they are de facto sacked for some performance failure. So, or they leave just before they're sacked, or they're moved on. So that's what's going on. It's a very harsh new public management type of regime in the NHS in England for many of them. So they are not given the chance to talk about slack, to fail fast, fail again, and then learn and then do better. That has not been, and still is probably not, the culture at NHS England.
I think this panel is really doing justice to the name of the Health Management Association, because it's very much about leadership and management, actually, and organizational management. So thank you so much. And we have now our final round, our wrap-up. I hope you haven't forgotten. Each of you is meant to say 1 or 2 sentences what you take out of this discussion. And you are welcome to be spontaneous. Federica, can we start like this? Then Thomas, Scott, and Naomi.
So I wrap up 2 messages from all the other panelists. For sure, I bring at home the word cloud of Naomi, which is amazing for me and very impressive. So how we have to support our leader and our people within the organizations. And the second one is pay attention to investments. I have an economic background, but usually I don't take care about this part of the story. But it is important how to finalize investments and how to be responsible in the investments by looking at that in a general perspective. So thank you to my colleagues of this panel.
Thomas.
What a nice transition. Thank you, Federica. I would say that what I retain is that you have to be prepared, and to be prepared to be resilient. And this is what you also need when you want to invest in a project, when you want to go for an infrastructure project. You need to be prepared for that project. And so this is the only way that you will then be resilient if you have to face a crisis.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Scott.
And resilience is precisely the thing you did not predict, which is why you want to invest in the intelligence of the people who can help you solve the problem.
Okay, could you repeat this for me?
If I'm worried about flood risks, I think hard about what I locate on the ground floor of the building. If I'm worried about power outages, I buy a generator. If I don't know what I'm supposed to be worried about, then I want to invest in as many people in the organization, and I want to invest in encouraging them to be able to think and act along with me.
Thank you so much, Scott. Naomi, you got the last word after your inspiring presentation, and you heard all the colleagues, something good, something news coming out of it for you?
Yeah, so I want to talk about, I'm taking away the vulnerability index, which I want to find out more about, because I think we could use that as a touchstone for best quality leadership, but also how we treat people across the globe, and including more vulnerable nations and those who are suffering armed conflict.
Thank you so much. And for me, it has been very clear from this panel and the discussion that the leadership issue is not just an issue for some elite workers or so. It's really a broad issue across all organizations and all levels of the organization. Thank you so much for our wonderful panelists. Please, great hand of applause. And I'm handing back to Federica. Federica.
I wasn't expecting it, but
But you like it.
that's fine. So again, thank you so much, Matthias. Thank you so much to all of you. This was very inspiring and extremely interesting. As we said before, this session is accredited. So once again, if you haven't scanned before the QR code, do that now and fill in the very quick survey, which just requires your first name and first and last name and email, so you can then claim the credits. I would like to again thank you all. Thank Matthias. Thanks the European Observatory for having organized this plenary. And we have a coffee break now. But after the coffee break, you can join 2 focus sessions, one here in the auditorium and one in room F302. Thank you so much.